Welcome to our session this afternoon. So, introduce myself, I'm Glenn Hyde. I run GMH Planning, which is a consultancy that specialises in NEC contracts. And Hezron Ricketts is joint presenting with me today, and he's a senior manager at Third Curve, who are project control specialists. So our session's kind of split into two today. We're going to be looking at the NEC family of contracts, what's new in NEC4. Very specifically, we're going to look at program requirements within NEC4, and then Hezron's going to come and share how on earth you can get project controls working alongside NEC4, which he assures me is possible. And then we'll just give you a couple of extra sources of information that are available to you as well. Some of you might have caught Ben Walker's presentation on NEC4 earlier, which I'm sure was very good from Ben, and he would have given you a wider overview, but I'm going to be focusing much more on the planning aspects. But just a wider view, if you were with Ben today, you're probably aware there are two new contracts now within the NEC4, and one is a design, build and operate contract, which is focusing on the operational side, and another one is the alliance contract, which is a sort of multi-party agreement where everyone's in it together, everyone lives and breathes by the same sword, so to speak. So a pure alliance contract. It's a bit like taking X12, the partnership arrangement, but then making it a pure alliance. So there are two brand new contracts within the family. The adjudication contract has been renamed the dispute resolution service contract. So a couple of interesting changes there that Ben might have talked about. First of all, dispute should go to senior management, first of all. So that's an obligation that happens. And there's quite a new process called a dispute avoidance board, so W3. So that is where a board of people are going to try to help you with your disputes during the life of the project. So that's quite an interesting concept. It'll be interesting to see how that evolves. There are two new contracts as well. There are subcontract versions of both the professional services contract and the term service contract. So previously, if you wanted to subcontract, you had to go and write your own rules on that. So they're the new contracts within the NEC4 family. That's in box one. There's a second box now, and you can see the box set on our stand over in the breakout areas. Box set 2 is all the guidance notes documents. So for each contract now, there's 2 books that are common to all. So establishing a procurement strategy and selecting a supplier. So those are global contracts for all. And then for each contract, there's an individual preparing a ... contract and managing a ... contract. So for ECC, for TSC, you've got new books which kind of merge the how-to guides and the traditional guidance notes you'll be familiar with. Some of you will be shocked to see no flowcharts. So there's just no flowcharts now within the NEC4. Most of the flowcharts, if you like them, they'll still be relevant, but they haven't updated the flowcharts within the family. So, Planning and Project Controls Expo today, so we're looking now at specifically main changes that as planning people or project controls people you're particularly going to be interested in and how they will be administered. First of all, Clause 13.2 just emphasises that lots of your projects now use one of these contract administration tools. So the likes of CMAR, the likes of A-Connect or Conject, as you might have known. So NEC4 now says, well, if you're using one, then reference within your contract data which one you're actually using. So 13.2 is confirming that communication flow can now be via the communication tool. Otherwise, it's as before, which was the address stated in Contract Data Part 1. So certainly all of your bigger projects will be using one of these tools, and more than likely either CMAR or A-Connect. Very subtle wording change to Clause 13.4. So previously, if you're issuing something for acceptance, the project manager always had to say why they weren't accepting, but now they've got to say in sufficient detail that will allow the contractor to actually correct the matter. Now that is a real point of clarity that is really needed, because the amount of times project managers say, I reject your design because it doesn't comply with the works information. Well, give me a clue here, which bit? Or I don't accept your program because it's not realistic or achievable. Again, on a 10,000 line program, please give me a clue. So you should always want to get to acceptance, so that just stops the project manager just rejecting on a whim. They've got to give detail to allow you to correct that. They've changed the early warning clause. It used to be clause 16, it's now clause 15. Don't lose sleep over that like I did. That's one of those real annoyances. We all know early warnings is clause 16. It is now clause 15. And it also now changes it from a risk register to an early warning register. Hallelujah, I hear you say. It should have always been called that. I spent 12 years of training explaining the difference between a risk register and a risk register. I don't have to do that anymore. So now your traditional risk registers that you've always maintained, you can do with whatever you want, have as many columns as you like, and separately we're going to have this thing called the early warning register, which is just what you've previously known as the risk register. Few bits of tidying up as well. It obligates the project manager to produce and issue the first early warning register within a week of the starting date, and also to have your first early warning meeting within 2 weeks of the starting date. So all those risks identified in Contract Data Part 1 or Data Part 2, you will discuss them early on. 15.2 confirms that later meetings will be instructed by either party or at the intervals stated in contract data. Another nice little element we've got now, so you can have an early warning meeting interval stated within contract data to encourage the regular happening of those meetings. Again, subtle points of clarity. 15.2 tells us subcontractors can attend if they would assist with the decision. You'd like to think, well, we'll probably do that anyway, but it encourages that. And 15.3 talks about extra emphasis on the early warning meeting to review previous actions and decide if any different actions need to be taken and who should take them. Again, you'd like to think that would happen, but it's now in print that that has to occur. And there's an obligation on the project manager to reissue the early warning register within 1 week. Previously, I think in practice, it was 5 minutes before the next meeting was otherwise when they'd issue that. So now they've got to do it within that timescale. Clause 16 is now called Contractor Proposals. So 16.1, contractor can propose to the project manager a change in scope to reduce the amount the client pays the contractor to provide the works. And within 4 weeks, the project manager either accepts the proposal and issues the instruction change in the scope, or issues a proposed quotation or rejects the proposal. Now, the subtlety here is that finally, under options A and B, your lump sum fixed price contracts, there is something in it for the contractor who actually has proposed this value engineering idea, because previously there was nothing really in it for them, or they got all of the value. So now we've got something called a value engineering ratio, which is included within Contract Data Part 1. The employer sets that, and if it's 50-50, then the contractor, any savings they come up with, they would be entitled to 50% of the saving. Point to note, clients, be careful you get this around the right way, because it says that you reduce the amount, the total of the prices reduces by the amount you stated within contract data. So if you're on a 70-30 split, you can actually get that very easily around the wrong way and give the contractor far too much money saving, which obviously you wouldn't want. 50-50, I think it doesn't matter which way round you do it. QSs, yeah, that should be okay. For options C and D, as before, there'll be no change to the total of the prices, so the value engineering savings will be split according to the gain share, pain share mechanism in that regard. In terms of programme, not too much change, certainly for 31.2. You'll be familiar with that big list of stuff you've got to include in a programme. The only real change to 31.2 is an extra line saying a programme issue for acceptance is in the form stated in the scope. So just a bit more of an indication there. The employer might be thinking, sorry, the client, because that's another change. So now we've got the client, and you might think what scope? Well, that used to be what we call works information. So those are just two name changes we now got across the whole of the NEC family of contracts. Here's a subtle change, 31.3. Raise your hand to the room, contractors, if you've ever had a project manager not respond to your programs. Ever had that happen? Okay. Now, if they don't respond, you can remind them of their of their failure to respond within the correct timescale, and after a further week of silence, that will now be deemed accepted. Good clause? Okay. No, from the client. I think that is a good clause. What I don't think actually is that will encourage lots of deemed acceptances. What I think it will encourage is a forced response, and okay, probably that response will be a rejection. But you can take rejection, can't you, contractors? You've had to get used to that over the years, but at least you'll now know why, and they've got to tell you in sufficient detail that will allow you to correct it. So I think that's a good clause, but maybe not for the reasons you might think. 32.1, slightly strange change here. They've deleted the requirement to show implemented compensation events on a revised programme. So if you remember, this is NEC4, and you've got to show actual progress, implemented compensation events, how you plan to deal with delays, and any other changes the contractor proposes to make. So NEC4 has actually deleted that line. Now, I'm actually okay with that, because I understand that, well, the first line means you've got to show progress, so you've got to show non-implemented compensation events on the programme if they're impacting the works. So to me, that's not an issue, but I do fear some people might say, well, we can't show implemented compensation events on the programme anymore. That's not the case. So again, with a bit of guidance, a bit of education, you'll understand why they've made that change. Should you show non-implemented compensation events? You have to. The only difference is it can't affect completion date yet. It can only move plan completion. A few tightening up elements around acceleration. So even more forces the case that acceleration has to be by agreement. So now the project manager can't even instruct a quote without your contractor agreement. So it has to be by agreement that a quotation is submitted. Previously, they could instruct a quote, but now, if parties are willing to consider it, then they can instruct the quote. They've added in specific timescales, so 3 weeks to produce the quote and 3 weeks to reply. I'm guessing if you're accelerating, that's not very quick when you're trying to look for acceleration, and time will be moving on. So obviously, they're maximum timescales. You don't have to take that long. Also includes response to acceleration quotation as a core clause. That used to be lost in the option clauses. Payments, couple of elements. So obligates the contractor to submit applications, how they've actually been assessed. So a bit more clarity on level of detail your payment is made up of. And here's quite a big change, 50.4. If the contractor doesn't submit an application, then currently under NEC4, project manager has to make their own assessment. Now, the project manager will say, well, it's either 0, or actually, if I overpaid you last month, it's negative. Now, I don't actually think that clause is needed, because the one piece of paper the contractor, in my experience, always remembers to put in on time to good detail is how much they want paying. But nevertheless, no application, no payment. I guess it goes without saying as well, this translates down the line to your supply chain. So subcontractors, no application, no payment. I see contractors' eyes lighting up in the room at that point. This is a clause number change, so same clause. So 25% if the first programme hasn't been accepted is now clause 50.5. So I just highlight that because everyone knows 50.3, it's now 50.5. Compensation events, a couple of new ones. So number 20 is the project manager notifies the contractor that a quotation for proposed instruction is not accepted. So contractors in the past, you couldn't claim for cost of preparing quotations. Under A, it's excluded. Now, if a proposed one does go ahead, then you can put in the price of producing that quotation, which I think seems fair. And 21 is a bit of a throwback, because this used to be in NEC2, so now they've added in extra compensation events within Contract Data Part 1. So those can just be added in, they'll be listed in your Contract Data Part 1. 61.4, responses to notified compensation events, clarifies that if the compensation event isn't notified, the project manager would confirm no change to prices or completion date. That's a point of clarity. And this is an important clause, 63.1. Adds the term dividing date in terms of actual and defined cost. So 63.1 talks about actual defined cost, forecast defined cost. Now it gives it a name as to when that switch point is, and that switch point is either when the project manager instructed the change decision or the compensation event was actually notified. So it's got a name now, which is quite good. 63.5 used to be 63.3, and this is the one that says a delay to completion date is assessed as the length of time that due to the compensation event, plan completion is later than plan completion as shown on the accepted programme, and now it says current at the dividing date. So it's now adding clarity as to which programme you actually use, and then it repeats the same wording for key dates. Then, answers on a postcard, there's a new clause that they've added that I do not know what the heck it means. And the good news is when I've spoken to NEC, no one actually from there can tell me what the heck their own clause actually means as well. And this NEC4 came out on the 22nd of June. On the 23rd of June, I posted an article. You might have caught it. It was called the NEC4 Elephant in the Room. And apparently the NEC wasn't too happy with the picture that I put in the article. But there was a big issue that was missing, and that is if a programme, show of hands in the room, on a project, who's not had an accepted programme in the last 4 weeks? Is there 1 or 2 hands? Oh, blimey, lots of hands, there's a surprise. So, no accepted programme for a while, and some of you it's been several months. So if the last accepted programme is 6 months old, sure, we use the last accepted programme, but what about, are there any other compensation events that have happened in the period by any chance? And is there progress that's changed? Well, surely we've got to take that into account, but the contract wasn't clear on whether that was the case. And finally, some of you might have caught it, in October there is now a drafting practice note. So the NEC have authored this, and the wording of it I'm very happy with, because it's been clarifying what I've been saying for a number of years. This practice note is available on my website, but if you want to come and get a paper copy, then our shared stand in the corner, we've actually got copies of this. You can come and take one away today. So basically, it is a summary of what that clause is actually saying. So the good things about the practice note, well, it's well written by 4 experienced practitioners. It says what I've been saying in articles for years, and in summary, it says why you use the last accepted program to assess CEs, you first have to take into account progress and other compensation events that have occurred up until this dividing date. So that's the positives. The negatives, okay, it's been so late in coming. So I've been writing articles for 12 years saying, look, this is a missing in the contract. Guidance notes aren't part of the contract. And when it suits people, they remind you very quick, oh yeah, but the guidance isn't part of the contract. We've still got this last line of 63.5 that I don't actually know what it means. And this has only been specifically written for NEC4. The same principle should apply for NEC3. And I think I have now convinced NEC that they are going to write this same note for NEC3. So watch this space. Hopefully within a couple of weeks, you'll have the equivalent guide for NEC3. I could write it, but I think it has so much more meaning if it comes from the authors of the contract. So the only other problem, potentially, clause 63.5, the last sentence, the guidance note and the practice note don't necessarily actually join up together. So they should obviously be cohesive. The whole idea of NEC is we know where we stand, so that is potentially a negative. So very hard to cram into 15, 20 minutes into what's new in NEC4, but I'll come back at the end and just share with you where you can get some more information. But certainly I've written comparison documents for all of those contracts, and they're available on the website. So I'll pass over to Hezron now, who's going to talk about how we can run project controls alongside these.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hezron Ricketts, and thanks, Glenn. Now we can get something interesting. I'm just joking. The amount of interest at the stand today about the NEC version 4 has been incredible, and everyone just comes up and everyone's got their little story. What about this clause? Oh, Glenn, you know, and it's just been immense, really. So a pleasure to share the stand with you, to be perfectly honest with you, but I'm not going to go into any detail around individual clauses in the contract. I'm just going to talk about project controls or program controls, if that's what you implement in your organization, and how to run it alongside the NEC contract. So I've had a little bit of experience on a few jobs with a few different organizations and seen the NEC contract implemented well in places and not so well in other places, to be perfectly honest with you. It's given me an insight into how I think it should be done, and that's just my opinion here today. It's not gospel or anything like that. Unless it works and it sells and it makes money, then I've got the copyright on it. But yeah, some of the major jobs that I've been on and are still on, I think the NEC form of contract is a great form of contract for the types of projects we work in, infrastructure, major projects. And yeah, so I'll just run through where we have an issue. So for all of those organizations that I worked in or the projects I worked with, and for most organizations, the fundamental driver for their being or why they approach projects or do what they do is that they want to be a commercial success. Now, to be a commercial success, you cannot ignore contracts or whether you're going to get burnt over them. You need to make money. You need to have a black ledger. You can't be in the red. That means, and if anybody's commercial in here, you shouldn't, it's a controls event. The commercial teams usually take precedence over how we run our projects. Not to say that it's a bad thing all the time, because I've worked with some incredible people in my career so far. However, I think it's led to a lack of understanding on how we measure projects properly, how we identify early enough that there are issues and do something about it. Also, I think controls as an industry, and it's great that we're here, you know, I think over 1,000 people walk through the door today, that we try to standardize what we do as an industry, because there are lots of cottage industries of how we produce data, how we measure data, how we act upon data, and we need a consistent way to do it. You know, you take different professions, and they've got it nailed. You know, they've got their all. It might not be great, but they all do the same thing. And I think in controls we talk from a different hymn sheet a lot of the time. When we don't give clear data, we don't put ourselves across in the right way, people lose confidence, shareholders lose confidence, senior management lose confidence. And that is where I think we need to make a step change in the industry, start sharing what we do and standardizing what we do. So if the contract's king and everyone's looking after themselves commercially, I think that we're just forgetting a fundamental point across anything we do, and that is that the client for any project or program that has initiated it should be king. That should be the driver. If I'm building a house of my own, I'm taking the risk. It's my project. I shouldn't be worried about keeping a company commercially afloat. I should be worried about, I've put it on the line. I wanted a spec for a house that's this. I want to know when I'm going to get it and how much it's going to cost. And project control is a mechanism to ensure that we do that. It's to make sure that we deliver on time. We can identify early enough when there's an issue to ensure that we don't go into massive cost overruns, et cetera, get what we bargained for, and ultimately, cost-benefit ratio. I've heard it a few times today, but if I go and order a car from BMW, the manufacturing industry does this really well, right? You go to BMW, you don't go, oh, okay, I have a whatever model, 320, diesel, whatever, it's going to cost you this much money. They say, oh, 3 months, sir. You don't turn up 3 months later and go, sorry, mate, another 2 months, and actually, it's going to cost 10 grand more. You know, the manufacturing, he's got it nailed. It was mentioned by the keynote speaker earlier on. You know, we are behind as an industry. Agriculture, manufacturing, they've moved on in the last 15, 20 years, and we haven't. Construction has stayed the same. So, NEC versus project controls. What's the real issue? If we go through, and okay, Glenn, you mentioned how often you gave a show of hands of how many of you had a program not accepted in the last 4 weeks. I did a talk actually at Glenn's conference a couple of years ago, and I made a show of hands, and I think it ran into half the room still had their hand up a year after having not had a program accepted. The idea is you've got to get programs accepted, guys. You've got to work with the team. But regular acceptance of a program effectively resets your baseline position under the NEC contract. The NEC contract doesn't recognize baselines in the traditional sense. I don't even think they're mentioned anywhere in the contract. This is a problem. Me as a client, you as a client, anyone as a client, if you haven't got a baseline that you're measuring from, you've got a contract that's being administered, but don't have a reference point in that contract to say, this is what I asked for originally, there's a fundamental issue. So this constant reset of what is acceptable and the position for the contract is where you need to run another tool in your life cycle to get the desired outcome. Some call it performance measurement baseline. It's a few other names, but essentially, a performance measurement baseline is a snapshot in time, first accepted program usually. You lock it down. It doesn't stay the same though. You have to pull in implemented compensation events as you go along. So the issue with a PMB that people find is that a contractor's program inside the NEC contract, it's your program, you own it. You're bound by a set of dates that you need to deliver to, but your works are your works. And so long as you meet the contract requirements, you can manage and plan your work any way you like. Excuse me. But when you run a PMB, you take away progress. You don't add in progress from a contractor. You move it along each period only with implemented compensation events. Running a PMB alongside your monthly process is an onerous task. It's an additional piece of work. Sometimes people view it as doubling up, and I'll just run through what the issues are. Most people think it's twice the work. General changes that you make to the plan. So a contractor might decide to resequence work within a set of key dates. They're entitled to do that. you wouldn't go and replicate that piece of work on a P&B, so you get some divergence in your P&B from where your current program for acceptance is. Measuring the impact of CEs on a performance measurement baseline versus a program for acceptance, if you've gone months since your P&B or program acceptance came in, the direct comparison is sometimes impossible to make. You can be comparing apples and pears. And obviously it requires more front-end work to get a P&B up and running and integrated into your systems and processes. But these really aren't issues. If you set your systems up properly, to be honest, it's not twice the work. Tools like Primavera, Asta, all of the planning tools, cost tools, risk tools, these make our job a hell of a lot easier to do this now. Replication isn't really there. If you take a plan, for example, you have usually in a compensation event assessment, you're going to take a series of work. You know where it starts, where it ends, where it links into the rest of your program, what impact it has. That's usually transferable. You can copy and paste it into a P&B. You don't have to reschedule the whole thing. If we use things like rolling wave planning with work packages and planning packages, we take away the ambiguity of long-term planning in our contractors' plans. So if you've got things that are 2 years, 3 years down the line where the detail is probably going to change when you come to get updates in the design or works information, if you use planning packages and work packages, you minimize that effect so that you are seeing eye to eye with a contractor and a P&B that matches their plan a little better. Again, this comes down to assessment of CEs is why we're all here. We want to get to a point where our contracts reach a positive end for everyone. Contractors need to make money. Clients need to get what they bargained for. And the assessment of CEs effectively is usually where we fall down. We even get to the point where we start accepting programs because we work it out, but we can go months, sometimes years, without accepting a compensation event because we just can't get around to agreeing what impact it really had and who was at fault. The front-end work, to be honest, is a given. Any major project or program shouldn't skip this point. It's the most pivotal point, and I've seen it time and time again where people try to skirt over what they should be doing, setting your project up for success and putting the work in up front, getting the right people involved to do it. If you do that, all of the things above should be easier for you. So just 4 things I want to go over, which I think will actually make a huge difference if you go back and you want to take it away and try to change the way that you want to do things with your work. And that is contract admin. You know, the rolling change that goes on where you can sit there with a proportion of your compensation events on a contract unresolved for months is no good to anybody. As well, Glenn touched on it with a deemed acceptance clause in the NEC4. This is going to put you in hot water if you don't, going forward. If you get to a point where you start having programs automatically accepted because you can't get around to agreeing them, you're going to be in hot water. It's a joint effort. We are, as a people, as human beings, nothing achieved in a team has ever been replicated by individuals better. We are greater than the sum of our parts when we work well as a team. But siloed working happens all over the place. Too often the planners sit in one corner, the costies sit in another corner. I mean, I don't like, no, I'm joking. I love costies. But people don't work, we don't have our teams all working together in synergy, sat together. And as well, the controls and commercial teams, how often have you seen those two teams integrated on a project? Or you'll just have a PM sat with his planner, the commercial team is sat on the other end of the building. Those are the things that need to change so that you have a more fluid team that works together, that solves the issues as you move. Integration, I touched on it before. The events like these are only really possible with a sponsorship that comes, and a lot of the vendors out there today produce some amazing tools, to be perfectly honest with you. You have to use these tools if you want to do this on any type of complex project. Dr. Hancock talked about it earlier, data, and getting quality data is an issue and that's absolutely true. You know, some of our major projects still run plans in Excel, as you mentioned earlier. Their cost management is run in Excel. It's just really not good enough. As I talked about, the manufacturing industry and the agricultural industry have moved light years ahead of us in this stuff. Integrated tools are the way forward. It must be the case. We get more and more data on our projects every year, and it's not possible for you to manage it individually on spreadsheets. So you need an integrated, well-working team. And finally, education. So, and value, project controls, all this stuff. Senior management need to push for education amongst themselves as well as the rest of their organizations, but really understanding what performance data is on a project is absolutely key. I've seen it too many times where people they're used to the CPM world, you know, critical path items, milestone moves, it's red, amber, green, great. They start looking at EV information, okay, well, can we rag it? Well, it's not how it works, guys. You know, EV is about the backup of work that we're lodging. If we are at a 0.7 SPI, we've got to go 1.3 of where we originally planned to get back to where we get to. That's just to get back on plan. People don't really understand what it means, and we push loads of float into plans and let stuff move around. We need to educate everyone across the board, really. And I think that's about it. We'll close out.
Thanks, Hezron. It's hard for us to do this topic justice in half an hour, but hopefully we've given you a bit of a flavour. If I'm sat where you are, I always want to learn something from a session like this. We're all experienced guys in the room, but I want to learn something. So hopefully you have taken something away. But today's not it. There are various other sources of portals that we can help you with going forward. We've just launched this week our Built Intelligence e-learning academy. So the NEC4 version is now available. So this is a series of bite-size modules that you as a company can buy, or you can buy as individuals. And there's a series of modules, questions at the end to demonstrate your sort of competency and understanding of that. So you can come and talk to us about that today. We've got the LinkedIn forum. Now, this was an old screenshot, 5,955. We've just tipped over into 6,000 this week. And if you had joined on Monday, you could have been the 6,000th person and won a bottle of champagne and a box of chocolates. Don't wait for 7,000 before you join, okay? So this is a fantastic group, NEC people, and it's the biggest discussion forum in the industry for managing issues. So you can look at the discussions that are going on or post your own. We've even had projects posting their own disputes jointly in here and getting a free adjudication. So interesting. But I think that's a great idea. We've also got Reach Back. Anyone got this? Raise your hand if you've got Reach Back. There's quite a few hands. So this is our question and answer portal. So we've got well over 2,000 questions already in here. So if you ask a question within Reach Back, then one of our experts will give you an answer normally within hours as to what that is. So LinkedIn, more discussions. Reach Back is more pointed questions. But already there's a whole wealth, and you can download that as an app as well. We did think about charging 99p for that app, but we thought QSs wouldn't download it. So we made it free, so everyone's got that. And then you've got our respective websites. So the GMH Planning website, there's a whole load of downloads. There's guidance on my website, and the Third Curve website, new venture for these guys. You can go and see what they're up to in terms of looking to provide project controls excellence within the organisation. We're in a stand number 22, which is between Costain and Seymour. Give us 10 minutes and we'll be back there. So our NEC4 contracts are there. We've got the guidance note. You can take away a copy of that, and we can chat to you about any questions you might have around NEC. But we've got 5 minutes at least to take any questions from the audience now, any specific questions on anything you've heard for today that either myself or Hezron maybe can help you with.
You talked about the education piece. And I know, Glenn, we've used you on Tideway to do joint training with our various contractors. Is that the norm now? Are people having that joint training at the beginning and at certain points throughout the job?
It's increasing. Obviously, for me as a trainer, that's good news. Do you know what's really interesting is not in your organisation. So as a client organisation, you've commissioned joint training. But what I'm actually finding is contractors are putting within their bid that they're proposing to run this session and get me to come in, or someone to come in and do those. So yeah, increasingly, probably at least once a week now, I'm doing joint sessions for a project team. So that'll be the contractor and the client organisations, and I can then, as an external person, tell everyone these are the rules that the contract says, and I'll have reviewed your own Z clauses, so I can integrate those in to your session as well. Because at the end of the day, we just want everyone to be following the contract. So you need to understand what the rules are. Sometimes it's the client organisation who actually haven't got the clearest understanding of it. Sometimes it's the contractor. So yeah, I'm happy to say that is increasing. I think that's one of the most valuable workshops you can run on a session, whereby everyone gets a common understanding of what the rules are. It's quite a wide topic, isn't it? So it's quite hard to pin in specific questions necessarily. But do come and ask us at the stand. So we'll take individual questions. You've got on there the details, so you've got our websites, reach back, you've got the LinkedIn, and we just got the new launch of our NEC4 Academy as well. So thanks for your interest in the session. Hopefully it has been relevant and something you can take away, and we'll look forward to seeing a few of you at our stand very shortly. Thank you.